As well as orientation selectivity, another important property which arises for the first time in V1 is that inputs from left and right eyes are combined on the same neuron for really the first time. Remember, in LGN, in the lateral geniculate nucleus of the thalamus, inputs from the left and right eyes are separated layer by layer. In input layer 4 of V1, still inputs come predominantly from one or the other eye, so you'll remember those ocular dominance columns and the kind of zebra stripes that you see in layer 4. But outside layer 4, most neurons in V1 are binocular, so that means that they're receiving input from both the left eye and the right eye. And many of these cells are tuned for binocular disparity. Now that's the offset between left and right eye images, which gives us our 3D or stereoscopic vision. So suppose we didn't have two eyes, we just had one eye. So if we're looking at a tree in front of a mountain, they appear in line with one another. So this is the retinal image that you would see, and this is a top-down view. Now, in fact, of course, we have two eyes viewing the world from different positions, offset slightly on our face. And that has consequences. It means that objects at different distances appear at different locations in the two eyes. So in this example, let's say we're looking at the distant mountain, then you can see that the tree is to the right of the mountain in the left eye, but to the left of the mountain in the right eye. Do you see that? And so because we're looking at the mountain, by definition it's falling at the fovea in both eyes, but the tree's image is falling at different positions in the two retinas. So there's an offset between it. A disparity is the word that vision scientists use for that offset. And your brain can detect that very small disparity between the two eyes' images and use it to deduce that the tree must be in front of the mountain. Now, it's important to point out that stereopsis isn't the only cue to the distance of objects. The world doesn't appear flat when you cover one eye, and a one-eyed person would still be able to see that the mountain was further away than the tree. And that's because visual images offer lots of depth cues. I'll just run through some of them here. So there's perspective. For example, the convergence of the parallel lines in this photograph give you a clear sense of the corridor receding into the distance. There's occlusion, which refers to the way that a closer object covers up part of objects that are further away. So you can see that this wolf must be behind this tree. There's shading, so you get a sense of the shape of this statue by the pattern of light and dark across it. Texture gradient, so on this beach we deduce, or we believe, that the pebbles must in fact all be on average the same size across the beach. So the fact that the texture is fine here and coarse here suggests that this part of the image is nearer. There's known size, so we know roughly how big a car is, so when it appears smaller on our retina it must be further away. All those cues together are sometimes called pictorial depth cues because they're ones that have been traditionally exploited by artists, like in this beautiful image. You can see many of them there. The perspective cues and the changing size of the human figures and so on give you a sense of the 3D structure on what is in fact a flat canvas. There are also other cues, of course, like blur. So in this photograph, the shallow depth of field gives us a sense of how very small this scene is with the ladybirds. So this is in sharp focus, but this ladybird is blurred because it's further away. And you remember, therefore, that the lens isn't able to keep both of them in sharp focus at the same time. Motion can be a powerful cue. This is an interesting example where what we actually have is a set of little dots moving from left to right across the screen with a sinusoidal velocity profile. But what you probably see, what I certainly see, is something like a transparent cylinder with white and dark dots on it, and it's rotating round and round. And you can see it either going clockwise or anti-clockwise, and it'll kind of spontaneously flip for you. So that's an impression of 3D structure that you get purely from motion. And in normal scenes, as you move around, that again is quite a strong cue to the 3D structure of the environment. As well as the blur that we talked about, there's actually you can sense, as it were, the accommodation of your own eye. You can see the change in focus actively here as the person or the camera is moving from focusing on the tiger to the chain link fence in front of it. And so the different accommodation that you need to focus on those two objects, again, is a cue to distance. And finally, we have vergence and disparity, so binocular cues to distance, disparity that we just talked about, and vergence or convergence, meaning the angle at which your eyes need to converge in order to fixate an object at different distances. So if an object's a very long way away, then your two eyes have to stare out with the gaze rays basically parallel, whereas if something's close together, then you have to cross your eyes in order to look at it when it's close up to you. So we can see that there are lots of cues to depth, and stereopsis is not the only one, but it is probably the only one where we can clearly understand how it happens in V1. These other depth cues, we still don't know exactly how they are interpreted by the brain, and it certainly happens in many different visual areas. Whereas stereopsis, we can say that there's a distinctive contribution in V1 where you find these binocular neurons that are receiving input from both eyes. So we saw before that you can talk about the receptive field of a visual neuron, meaning the location in the retina to which it's sensitive to visual input. If a neuron's binocular, then it must have two receptive fields, one in each eye. So this neuron in cortex is receiving input via many synapses and many other neurons right down to the photoreceptors. It's receiving input ultimately from photoreceptors in the two eyes. And hopefully you can see or get a sense for how this can make the neuron tune to objects at different distances. So what I've drawn here is a binocular neuron. Here are its receptive fields in left and right eyes. We've got a central on region in both receptive fields, and I've drawn a bar over that central on region in both eyes. So this neuron is going to be firing strongly because the central on region is strongly activated in both its receptive fields. And this location on the left and right retina corresponds to this location in 3D space. What happens if the bar were to move closer? And I'll just write down, do you remember that we talked about how the total response from a receptive field is obtained by summing the little pixels of the image and the receptive field weighting? So for this neuron, we're going to do that in the left eye and then analogously in the right eye. And the total, let's say the response of the entire cortical neuron could be simply the sum of both of these. So to begin with, this neuron is responding very nicely and strongly because it's seeing a bright bar on the on region of both its receptive fields. So L plus R is going to be quite large. But what happens as the bar moves closer? As it moves closer, then you can see, again, the image is shifting in opposite directions in the two eyes. It's moving towards the temple, temporally in the right eye, and also in the left eye. So the bar is gradually moving off this central on region into a part of the receptive field where it isn't driving the neuron as strongly, and so the response of this neuron is going to fall off. And over here, the cell's now actually receiving inhibitory input, so it would in fact be silent. So you can see that the response of this neuron is changing with the disparity of the stimulus, with the difference in position in left and right eye. So you can see that the bar is over to the left of the receptive field in the right eye and over to the right in the left eye. So there's a large disparity, and this neuron doesn't like that disparity as much as it liked the original disparity when the bar was aligned with the on region, so the receptive fields in both eyes. So in this way, binocular neurons can be tuned to disparity. And the real thing to take home from this is that V1 is the first place in human beings and other primates where you find these binocular cells which are receiving input from both eyes and can respond to stimulation in either eye. And it's the first place in the visual system where you find cells that are tuned to binocular disparity. And these cells are believed to form the basis of our 3D or stereoscopic depth perception. As discussed, we have many other forms of depth perception, but specifically stereopsis requires these binocular neurons. V1 isn't the end of the process, it's just the beginning, but it's the first place where this information is encoded in our visual system.